Oi, oi, it's your boy, the Ignacio Bahamondes of Big Ratio Twitter Respondes, Jack Slack. It's the Jack Slack podcast, and we're returning triumphantly from a week off. And we couldn't have picked a more tepid main event to do it with. Oh boy, I didn't care about this one when it was announced, and I cared even less. Actually, I cared more when I found out that Vicente Luque had had a gigantic brain bleed after his last fight. But, Raphael dos Anjos at welterweight does nothing for me. I don't think he's been particularly... I mean, I think he's probably one of the greats. When he retires, I'll say, wow, what a great fighter, had a great career, blah, blah, blah. But we are so far into the twilight of his career. Basically, everything he's ever done at welterweight has been fairly underwhelming, or has come against a not very good opponent, or a washed name like Lawler. And he's tough. He's tough as nails. You know, it's always impressive that he goes the distance with like the Usmans, the Colby Covingtons and so on. And that's one of the reasons you got to sit up and pay attention when someone stops him, because he's had 50 fights and he's been stopped 4 times in that career. Stevens, Alvarez, Fiziev, and then someone else that I'm forgetting. But his best days basically ended with his title reign. He also has a game that requires him to have some physical edge over the opponent for it to work well, and if he doesn't, you get exactly what you got here against Vicente Luque, where he does all his usual looks, and then the other guy just gets up anyway, or just breaks his hands apart and turns back to face him, or gets an underhook and turns him onto the fence and bullies him. This fight was enormously frustrating because when Raphael dos Anjos threw, he landed, and then he'd still go into his bullshit double leg along the fence. And it's a very old-fashioned way of looking at things. You know, Greg Jackson used to teach that the locked hands double along the fence was the number one technique in MMA. It's the go-to method to get someone to the mat. It's the highest percentage takedown. It isn't anymore, to be honest. Or probably isn't. I haven't really looked into that much, but it doesn't happen as much because people are far more comfortable spreading their legs into almost a full split and denying you the double leg. But it's one of those moves where if you do the setup well and you time it well, you can get the guy throwing at you, duck in on his hips, hit the fence and just pull his butt out or his knees out really easily. And there was one of those in this fight, but most of it was just hitting the fence for this double leg, not getting it. Luque would normally turn his back and do not quite what Alexander Volkanovski did, but more like the standard. I think it was Neil Magny versus Anthony Rocco Martin, which I said was like modern MMA 101, because they just get the other one to the fence, attempt to take down, give up the back, body lock, press themselves into the fence so that they wouldn't be taken down as easily, split the hands, and then turn back in and circle back to the centre of the cage. And that was what Vicente Luque did dozens of times here, but he didn't run to the centre of the cage. Instead, he turned back in and attempted to take Dos Anjos down. And he did it with a really cool little angle pick, which shout out to someone. I was watching someone's video this week. I'm not going to go check it, Armchair MMA or Armchair Combat or something like that. But they did a video about wall wrestling, and it was really interesting. And it hit on some themes that we talked about before, like I pointed out when during Volkanovski versus Makhachev, how important that head straight into, like top of the head straight into the fence position was for Volkanovski. And he actually made Makhachev take 2 bad attempts at mat returns that put Makhachev underneath him momentarily. But this lad, go check out his channel. He's probably got more subscribers than me, but I'm giving him a shout out anyway. But he was talking about this ankle pick that Colby did to Robbie Lawler, where he got really low on the legs, put his head into Robbie Lawler's thigh as Robbie Lawler was in his split-legged runner's stance, and just pulled the ankle out underneath him. And Robbie Lawler went straight to his knee and then his butt. And Vicente Luque did that, I want to say 150 times in this match. It's probably less than that, but it felt like that. He kept getting Raphael dos Anjos down to his hips, and if not consolidating position, at least Dos Anjos would have to show his back on the way up. They pointed out that Dos Anjos always wears ankle wraps, and then he took in states where it's legal, don't get Dominic Cruz started on that, but he had ankle sleeves on to begin with, and then he took them off in the corner because he kept getting ankle picked. The other one was that he kept switching legs to do it. When you're up against the fence defending a takedown, you spread your legs. I mean, certainly when someone drops levels to go after your legs and hips, you spread your legs into that runner's stance. But you also see people do it with the other way around. So So if I turn towards my right, normally my right leg's in front of me, my left foot's behind me. Instead, they'll switch the legs over, so they'll turn to their right, and they'll put their left leg in front of them and their right leg behind them. So you're almost turning your back. There's a few notable examples. I mean, Dominic Cruz does it sometimes. I think Conor McGregor did it against Nate Diaz. But Rafael dos Anjos was doing it here and trying to grab the Kimura over the top. Because the Kimura is a really good weapon the Kimura and the Kimura trap are really good weapons when the guy is bent over at the waist or coming in low on you. You can get your belly over the top of their head, over the back of their head with the Kimura grip. You're laughing. You can start like falling to your back, pulling them over the top, attacking their back. Look up the Kimura trap. Great system. I think everyone should learn it. I think every grappler coming to MMA should learn it. But every time Dos Anjos did it, he'd just sort of get bumped forward onto his knees and then have to start standing up from the turtle again. Striking, the stats on this one were interesting because they put significant strikes not that different. I think it was 77 to 66, which is, 11 more strikes, but total strikes, Vicente Luque was much higher. I don't know if that's because he was jabbing so much or because he was landing lots of pity-patter strikes from the clinch. I think it was the jab, but the jab, I mean, not counting the jab as a significant strike is kind of annoying. But yes, this was one that, Dos Anjos probably could have won this on the feet. Vicente Luque, dangerous as hell on the feet, but a lot of what he does, for all the Daniel Cormier talking about how his hands are in perfect position and he's moving his upper body and stuff, when he gets walking after people, he gets quite, he just sort of walks in on a track. And if you watch his fight with Jeff Neal, where he famously got a brain bleed, he's just sort of following Neal around and Neal's going backwards and then stepping in and beating the shit out of him because he's just coming onto it. If you watch Michael Chiesa outstrike him, it's by circling the cage, letting Vicente Luque chase him, and then popping him down the centre. So, I mean, that could have been a good fight for Dos Anjos, but Dos Anjos wanted to be on the offensive against the fence, so he was walking through those jabs a lot of the time. The other one was that, Dos Anjos really, it's a one-directional game. It's strike, level change, fight for the double along the fence. And he'd have trouble because Luque would turn his back and break his hands apart, and without a good grip behind someone, you can't really attack them that effectively. Grappling-wise, what Dos Anjos could desperately do with is just more confidence coming back up and throwing strikes when the guy's against the fence. He's always been a great body hitter, or he certainly was during his lightweight run. He used to enter with body shots and catch people along the fence with body shots. But, do that coming up from the legs. Do that breaking out of the clinch. Do that when the guy's separating your hands. That's when he could have teed off on Vicente Luque for not free. I mean, it is always dangerous because Vicente Luque has a great left hook, which is the king of the counter punches and makes every sort of exchange like that dangerous. But come up, throw 3 strikes, drop back down on the hips. That's something that even back in the day when people were doing this, get to the fence, level change onto the hips, lock the hands, double leg strategy all the time, guys would go up and down. You had to be able to do that. And Rafael dos Anjos, it's like a blind spot in his game. He just won't take a step back. I think because he thinks of it as a one track. It's like the whole idea of positional hierarchy in jiu-jitsu. He thinks of it as I do this, I do this, I do this, I do this. Anything other than that, than going to the next step, is a step back. And really it isn't. You just got to be able to let go and swing. And often, we talk about this all the time, but clinch striking along the fence, one of the most underused weapons in MMA. Breaking free and striking along the fence, anyone could do that, and it would massively increase their chances of scoring a good knockout punch, because the number one issue in MMA is getting close enough to hit people anyway. You got guys running backwards and forwards across the cage. But yeah, for a fight that I thought was not particularly interesting, I think I've talked about that enough. Good on Vicente Luque for getting a win. I don't think he should have been fighting. I think, people always get up in arms and go, he's a grown man, blah, 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 blah. Or where do we draw the line? Do you not let a guy fight if he's had a bad cut in his last one? It's no, I'm quite happy drawing the line at brain bleed. I think at that point, you probably shouldn't be getting hit in the head for a living anymore. Or go over and do it somewhere without a commission. If we're trying to do this dangerous sport relatively safely, we probably don't want people hemorrhaging out into their brain in the cage. Even crazier because Hunter, whatever his name is, former UFC lawyer, now UFC bigwig. Is he still their lawyer? He's their bigwig anyway. He's the guy who let Tony drive his car to renegotiate a fight. But apparently, like 2 weeks ago, he said there's never been a severe brain injury in the UFC. And I think bleed on the brain is a severe brain injury. He might have said serious. And he might have been laughing when he said it. In which case, I've got no legs to stand on. But I think that's a pretty serious brain injury. Bleeding of the brain. As a non-doctor. Co-main event, Cub Swanson versus Hakeem Duodo. Decent fight, I thought. And particularly interesting for a Hakeem Duodo fight. You know, he's mean Hakeem, but the mean normally refers to the stinginess with which he dishes out strikes. He is the favourite of, he's the darling of Twitter analysts who love to post GIFs of him doing a cool withdrawal of the lead leg and counter low kick 3 times in a fight. But of course, in a Twitter GIF, you can't see that that's all he threw in that fight. He is painfully low output. And, for all the mean mugging between rounds, it's like you had the chance during the round, mate. Why are you still mean mugging? But not here. Here he was good. I really enjoyed his performance here. He was really landing good counter punches, counter kicks. One of the examples of a guy when I always get on about people saying like, you can't low kick with him. He'll beat you to death for that. You know, as if like being good at low kicks makes you good at countering low kicks when they're completely different skills. Hakeem Duodo is genuinely a guy who, if you low kick with him, he's going to counter low kick you really well. But he's the one. He's the exception in MMA. The only guy doing that. But Cub Swanson came out and got his attention immediately with a double jab into a right straight, which I really liked because I'm always saying, for God's sake, everyone, double jab. The problem in MMA is closing the distance. Dude, sprint in to do that. I mean, Cub Swanson has a long history of like running in, throwing punches like he's doing front crawl in swimming or whatever you call it in America. But the double jab is a really nice weapon to cover some distance and get you close enough to throw. And he did. But Hakeem Duodo started reading his jabs and splitting him with his own jab, throwing the dipping jab. There were some lovely counter punches in exchange. I mean, watch this fight because the exchanges are all great fun. What I really like from both men, Cub Swanson loves throwing the left hook into the left round kick, sometimes to the head, but a lot of the time to the inside lead leg. And that works really nicely when he sort of steps off to the right. So he finishes a combination with the left hook and steps to his right and throws the inside low kick. And that's great. And Hakeem Duodo started doing that as well. And then they were also both using it when the other guy was trying to sidestep. And those are two, I had a good moan about the inside low kick a couple of weeks ago because it was all Justin Gaethje threw against Dustin Poirier as if he was going to knock him out with it, doing the same thing and getting countered about 8 times off it. But, inside low kicks are generally silly. But they do work well where you're breaking people's balance, when people are in motion. I love, particularly, like this is something I'm always saying about, when you get a guy along the fence and he's circling, you inside low kick the trailing leg. People are obsessed with like trying to low kick the leg that's circling out, which just means that you're sort of like in an awkward exchange with the guy. If you clip the rear leg inside, you can get a guy completely out of stance. You can start swinging on him, and you put him in a really bad position to deal with that. And of course, if you throw a nice low kick as inside low kick as you step out the side door, you break their stance and you make it hard for them to follow up, which is like half the point of stepping out the side door is to try and make it harder for them to follow up. So if you're going to add bonus points of damage, if you can add bonus difficulty for them to follow up, you can lower their accuracy. You can debuff them with an inside low kick. That's always good. What I liked in this fight was Hakeem Duodo's clinch work. He got to the clinch along the fence and he landed good knees, which is something we don't see enough. Everyone's always coming in with a Muay Thai background and then doing no kneeing for the clinch. But what he did was he was quite conservative with it, which I really liked, because if you watched Cub Swanson when he had his back to the fence, he was taking the overhook, he was cupping the other bicep with his hand, and then he was linking his overhooking hand over the top of his other wrist. And he was picking up his leg to stop the knees from coming in. He was checking with his leg and trying to put it all the way across Duodo, which we talked about with Alex Pereira did that in kickboxing against Simon Marcus to stop him from kneeing, but there was sort of like a danger of, he didn't have to deal with the danger of being thrown to his back because it was kickboxing. But Cub Swanson really overcommitted, like putting his knee across here because he wanted to step through and hit a Haragoshi or whatever that throw with the whizzer is. He's one of the few guys in men's MMA who routinely lands headlock throws and throws off the whizzer like that. I mean, go watch a Cub Swanson highlight. It's full of throws like that. And he did, in fact, land almost stick a headlock throw in the second round late in that. But he was trying to make space to do that along the fence. And Duodo was doing really well not biting on it, because Cub Swanson would throw a couple of knees. He'd start punching the body with his free hand, or with the hand that he needed least, and could pick up the controller with again. It didn't really work. Islam Makhachev, there's several great examples of this, of him having the overhook along the fence, kneeing the guy in the belly, not a huge, from a staggered stance throwing the knee, but poking the guy with his kneecap really well, really accurately in the belly. And then the guy trying to knee him back, going, I have the position, I have stance, I'm going to throw with power. And Makhachev steps across and throws them immediately, because that's all he wanted. He wanted the guy to commit his weight so that he could step through and throw him, and to get their hips up higher than his. But Duodo was not buying it. And this was a good card for Muay Thai clinch work, because, we'll talk about Khalil Rountree in a second, but he was doing really nice work with his knees along the fence as well. Swanson got the decision. Probably shouldn't have, and respect to him, he's such a vet that he's just like, I don't think I should have. But Hakeem Duodo, this is going to give him all the wrong messages, because this was the most active I've seen him in a fight in forever. He's not a finisher. He doesn't do enough, generally, to even come close to being a finisher. But he's probably going to take away the message from this fight that, I should throw less. I wasted too much energy and I didn't get the decision anyway. Oh, and the double leg from Cub in the last round was good, because you don't see him doing, regular wrestling an awful lot. But everything up to that on the card was finishes all the way down. Some of that's luck, some of that's the cards with people that you don't know on are sometimes the big bangers, and some of that's sort of Scott Coker matchmaking where the 13-1 guy is fighting the 15-7 guy. The 6-1 girl is fighting the 3-3 girl. Super exciting UFC star Terrence McKinney is fighting guy on a 2-fight losing streak in his only UFC fights. But from the beginning, Juliana Miller drunkenly went after Luana Santos, who threw back hammer fist style punches, and eventually chinned her and swarmed like a swarm of butterflies to get the finish. Damon Blackshear took down Jose Johnson and got a twister, which was really cool. But every meaningful thing that happened after the first takedown was directly as a result of Jose Johnson trying to throw back elbows at him. He's getting up, trying to separate the hands from the back body lock, and he goes, oh, this is really hard, I'll throw a back elbow, and then gets returned to the mat. Then he's almost getting twisted, and the whole thing is keep them from getting under your armpit. So he gives up hand fighting for a second and throws a back elbow, which either hit or missed, but you're never knocking anyone out from there. And it just meant that Damon Blackshear's head was then inside his armpit. Really silly, but, this is the undercard of the modern UFC. Jacqueline Amorim mogged Montserrat Ruiz, who I really only remember for getting held down in the scarf hold for 3 rounds and then being like, I'll follow you home, bitch, parentheses, and then get held down on your front lawn. But Montserrat Ruiz, she was at least tough here, because she was getting her arms twisted up behind her, she was in extended arm bars and things, and she was squirming her way out. This was her last chance to stay in the UFC, or, like she wants a world title, but just isn't good enough to win one. But when you're watching, the sweeps in this one, people are like, oh my god, sick sweep. Not really. If you hit an overhook pendulum sweep on someone just off the bat, it's because they're not very good. She basically threw herself towards her trapped arm before Amorim even got her hips out to pendulum. But I do like Amorim. She's got cool grappling. Good takedown in the first round, lovely top half work, and going for arm bars, which we always like. Because if they squirm out, at least you fucked their arm up, and then you can outbox them awkwardly, because they should be fighting with one arm. Martin Buday versus Josh Parisian. They should call him Martin B-Day, because he's washing away all the shit around the arse crack of the UFC heavyweight division. Both lads gassed inside 30 seconds. Buday's throwing awkward, leaning left hooks that don't look like they have any power on, but he managed to hurt Parisian with a jab, and then the whole fight was just him trying to follow up, and Parisian backing himself onto the fence and swinging drunkenly. This looked like Tank Abbott versus Scott Ferozzo 2, which you won't see on their official records because it happened in a backyard when they were both 50. And you can find video of that online. Cool Kimura to finish, though. Basically kneed him in the head when he stepped over. But, as long as you're doing something else, they don't tend to mind, these refs. Isaac Dolgarian, actually pretty impressive win over Frank Marshall. Frank Marshall's good. I believe he ran him to the fence and double-legged, or ran him to the fence with the double leg and bounced him off. A la Raphael dos Anjos' dream plan, but not like real life. But yeah, he got him down, started stepping over with the half guard. I thought we were going to get into one of those battles where Marshall's guard retention was good enough to stop Dolgarian making any meaningful progress, and Dolgarian wasn't going to strike effectively, but he did eventually push himself through to 3/4 mount, which in Jiu-Jitsu is nothing because you're almost back in the half guard and then the guy on bottom can start working. But in MMA, of course, it's mount in everything but name. So you just start chucking bombs down. When Damian Maia discovered this, he was like, oh, that's so much easier. Got the ground and pound stoppage with a couple of seconds to go in round 1. Impressive stuff. Terence McKinney against Mike Breeden. I liked the stepping left straight he threw off the bat, or whatever he is. I think he's the southpaw, isn't he? So he threw a stepping left straight, which was cool, and then he threw the left straight into left high kick, because why not? It's having its moment. You might as well throw one, because the chances are someone on this card's going to score a knockout with it. Just the way that people have been dropping dead from it. But yeah, I mean, it was standard T-Rex performance. He is like the ultimate front runner. He just, if you back up to the fence immediately. Oh, this was hilarious in the Miller versus Luana thingy fight. Miller came running out of her corner, and Luana Santos was stood with her back to the fence in her own corner, and she didn't like circle or try and meet her. She just stayed there, and luckily Miller's not very good, but like that's just the weirdest decision to make, to stand back in your own corner. Like the ref said go too soon, and you're like, hang on, what? But yeah, you knew Breeden was in for a hard time when he came out and like immediately backed up. Don't be doing that against Terence McKinney. Who was it who battered him the other day? Oh, Ismail Bonfim. Yeah, just put him against the fence, and he hated that. Absolutely hated it. And then his last one was Sadikov, who like survived the first round, and then almost immediately Terence McKinney's just not as good in the second round. He is the fighter for this generation of cards, though, because he's like all first-round stoppages, always exciting, can fight every 3 months, even if he gets knocked out. And he's making bank-off bonuses. Marcus McGee versus JP Byers was very uninteresting, even though there was a cool knockout. The middleweights just stank up the place. AJ Dobson versus Tefon Nchukwi. I like Nchukwi, but all he did was calf kick. And then occasionally take it up to the body, but a right round kick to the body on an orthodox fighter is mainly going to get their back. AJ Dobson has never had an interesting fight. This one stank. Jamie Pickett versus Josh Fremd also stank. The only interesting thing about it was that with no Joe Rogan there, no one is telling you that Jamie Pickett's actually a great striker and he just hasn't showed it. It's just one of those things that Rogan gets really into. It's kind of like how he's always telling everyone that Forrest Griffin had a really great guard. And then we saw it once against Rampage, and it actually was pretty good, but never has that been the case with Jamie Pickett striking. Yasmin Lucindo versus Poliana Viana. Viana is like the thirsty fanboy's favourite. She was complaining this week. She was like, I want to come out in my big titty Naruto cosplay and the UFC won't let me. And like, dudes are going off like, oh, they're not letting her show her personality. But she's actually pretty fun. I mean, she finishes fights. Yasmin Lucindo I remembered from the Yasmin Uruguay fight where she was just sort of like outclassed. But she is very young. And she came in on a really good contract too. Both those girls came in from other organisations, not through the Contender Series, and made double what the same people on the card from the Contender Series made. But Viana was looking good. She got the body lock, she'd hit the trip, she was doing well from the top, and then midway through the second round, she suddenly remembered, oh, it's a women's MMA fight. So she grabs a headlock. She's like, oh, bend her over with the side headlock, I'm going to noogie you. And then she gets taken down by Lucindo, and then the same thing happened in the second round, and she got arm triangled. Lucindo striking, still looking bit meh. Too much spinning back fisting, not enough good technical striking. But, you saw that against Uruguay. Uruguay just outclassed her, basically. And Khalil Rountree versus Chris Daukaus, the one that you all want to talk about because, it was the most exciting knockout on the card. And every couple of months, probably like once a year, Khalil Rountree comes out and has a showing that makes you go, damn, this guy could be a force. And he always does something just different enough that you go, he's going to get it together now. But he won't because he's Khalil Rountree. He's going to get bundled over by the first, competent wrestler that he meets at light heavyweight. And you're going to go, oh yeah, I remember. But that won't stop me getting excited because I love him. He's great fun. I remember him from the days when Anderson Silva was talking about this guy. I think it was Black Zillions. Oh no, Black House MMA. Anderson Silva was talking about this guy who was just a murderer. He was the hardest hitter anyone in the gym had ever seen. And he had 2 fights. And it came out later that was Khalil Rountree, who had started there to lose weight because he was like a big fat guy originally, which is an even more interesting wrinkle to the story. But then he got really into Muay Thai and he started doing like the lead leg switch kick and shit. But he came out in this one, and I believe he was the southpaw and Daukaus was the orthodox fighter, and he was hammer fisting the lead hand. Which, if you get wrist on wrist, that's really good. That's a old, incredibly old school technique from Daniel Mendoza, or the original Jack Slack, the chopper, smashing people's forearms with your wrists, or wrists with your forearms. And that was interesting, watching him do that, because Chris Daukaus was like, sort of lazily putting the hand out there to hand fight and to obstruct a jab. It's got a real purpose. But Khalil Rountree was sort of threw him for a loop by going, no, I'll just attack your hand. Which I think the most famous example of this I was thinking about earlier today in the shower when I was shadowboxing. Well, we all do our best shadowboxing. The Joe Louis special against Jim Braddock when he won the title. He throws a left hook to the body, but he throws it short because Braddock's hand is floating out in front of him. Braddock's in a very sort of like out-fightery stance with his elbow away from his body. So the left hook that looks like it's to the body hits the inside of Braddock's elbow. And obviously a Joe Louis left hook to an arm that's like loosely floating there. It's going to send it flying. So his arm goes flying out to the side and Joe Louis throws the right straight down the centre and knocks him out. It's a gorgeous little setup. But yeah, hitting people in the arms is it's more legit than you think it is because you're focused on knockout punches. But you're not going to knock people out with punches to the arms, but you can surprise them because it's something that like people aren't doing against pro fighters a lot of the time. But mainly here, Rountree was looking for the dipping right hook, kind of like Boudet was with his dipping left hook, and Daukaus was just looking for the 1-2. If Daukaus had ever thrown up a high kick, I mean, if Daukaus had done the show the right straight, throw the right high kick, it could have been lights out. But I'm not saying one shot, headshot, dead or whatever. I'm saying throw the high kick to stop people dipping. That's the whole point. You throw it and they stop dipping, and then that's taken away their favourite counterpunch. This is what used to hamstring Ross Pearson all the time. I'm always talking about it. Best head movement in MMA, possibly. Really dangerous counterpuncher. But the moment people started throwing kicks at like body height, because he was ducking down, the moment people started throwing kicks, he'd stand up and he'd be half the fighter that he normally is, or was. But Daukaus didn't work that out, so he was just chasing after him, getting countered with the right hooks to the chin. There was some lovely clinch work along the fence from Khalil Rountree, who looked like he didn't really want to engage with it, but it was doing the full-on, had the head and arm, but wasn't looking for like pinch headlock, shitty pinch headlock throws like Adriano Moraes was against Demetrius Johnson the other month. No, he had his head underneath the guy's jaw, hands locked behind the head, and he was there ready to knee, and he landed a couple of good knees. If you watch really good Thai fighters, they love that position. Sometimes they do. There's a great video of someone explaining it to Sylvie on her YouTube channel. But sometimes because they have obviously big gloves on. Sometimes they'll cross their wrists and they'll straighten their arms to pinch with the insides of the arms. As long as you've got your head underneath their jaw, it's a really hard position to deal with. But yeah, dinged him again with a counter right hook and then just stepped him with a left straight. Smoked him. Really impressive. Sad for Daukaus because I quite like the Daukaus brothers. They're doing what they can with what they got. But certainly the UFC have been a bit more forgiving with Chris Daukaus than they were with Kyle Daukaus because Kyle Daukaus was cut off like 2 losses and had looked pretty decent. But yes, Rountree in a good spot. Like him. Hope they don't give him another grappler next. I like how much he wears his influences on his sleeve, and I like how much he tries new things. And he's decided I'm not interested in like the perfect thing. I'm not interested in what the meta is now. I'm interested in what I can work on. Maybe what's not been tried in MMA. Like how many times do you see people switch kicking with the lead leg like he did against Eric Anders? I mean, it comes up every time you talk about Khalil Rountree, but it was pretty impressive. And a southpaw right hook is still pretty unusual if you can do it tight and land it as a counter. Big fan. Always have been. Just always you have to temper it with this expectation that he will lose against someone who's not even that good. So that was that card. It was all right. We got a UFC pay-per-view coming up with Sterling versus O'Malley, which should be good fun. I think there's interesting things to say about both those guys, so I might write something. I've got to catch up on last weekend's fights, which apparently had a really boring main event with Sandhagen wrestling Rob Font. There's a Bellator that happened, and the Bellator social media team were making sure that no one knew anything about it because they took all the GIFs down off Reddit. And I'm sure there's some boxing coming up soon. But yeah, we'll be talking about all of that on the Boycast or in an article that I write between now and then. If you want to get in on that stuff, sign up to the Patreon, support the podcast, be a boy. If you want to send an email to the podcast, jackslackpodcast@gmail.com. And if you want to see what I'm writing at any time, and I am writing now, fiveprimer.com. I am your boy, Jack Slack. Raphael dos Anjos losing until they make a 165 division, bless.